So here's a question to kick us off. Do trees have rights?
Hmm.
I know it sounds kind of radical,
Yeah.
right? But it's really at the heart of how we see our place in the environment. Think about it.
Yeah. Does a forest have value just because it exists?
Mm.
Or is it only about what it, well, provides for us?
Exactly. That question really cuts to the heart of it. And philosophers have been grappling with this stuff for centuries.
They really have, pushing us to think about obligations that go way beyond just our own species.
Right. And in this deep dive, we're really plunging into those philosophical dimensions, our whole relationship with the environment.
We'll be unpacking ideas from philosophy and the environment, looking at key things like anthropocentrism.
Which is valuing things for human benefit.
Versus ecocentrism, that's valuing the whole ecosystem itself.
And that tension between sort of taking what we need and maybe protecting what's there.
Stewardship versus exploitation, exactly. And this really fascinating idea that nature might have its own intrinsic worth.
So our aim here really is to give you the essential insights from these, well, pretty profound discussions.
Our mission is basically to pull out the most compelling ideas. We want to help you understand the different ways thinkers have approached our moral connection, our conceptual link to the natural world.
Kind of a shortcut to being well-informed on what's a really vital topic.
Absolutely vital.
Okay, so let's unpack that fundamental divide first.
Yeah.
Our obligations, human obligations to protect the natural environment.
Yeah.
Seems like there are two very different starting points.
Precisely. On one side, you've got anthropocentrism.
Human-centered.
Yeah, the core idea is nature's valuable mainly because it helps humans. Traditional Western ethics, for the most part, worked within this frame. Nature was seen as a resource, something to manage for our use.
So a forest is valuable because we can get timber from it or go hiking in it.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
then there's the other side.
Ecocentrism.
Right.
Right.
Which argues nature has value in itself, independent of how useful it is to us.
And that really challenges the old view, doesn't it?
Totally. It suggests the environment, non-human inhabitants, they might have moral worth, maybe even rights. So that same forest, from an ecocentric view, has value just because it's a thriving ecosystem.
Which really shakes up traditional Western ethics. It makes you wonder, do we have duties to things just because they exist?
It does. It forces us to think, do our moral obligations stop with humans? And there are some strong arguments saying no, they don't.
Like what?
Well, these non-anthropocentric views, biocentrism, ecocentrism, they suggest that individual animals, plants, whole ecosystems even, have what's called inherent worth.
Meaning we have duties directly to them, not just because helping them helps us down the line.
Exactly, direct duties.
Like the philosopher Arne Naess argued. He talked about inherent worth, right? That all living beings have it.
That's right, regardless of usefulness to us. So, yeah, maybe a beetle has as much right to exist as we do in that view.
Wow. And it's not just about individual creatures.
No, thinkers also bring up our obligations to future generations. What we do now, pollution, using up resources, it has huge consequences for people not even born yet.
That brings in intergenerational justice, right? What we owe to people who come after us.
Yeah, and folks like Stephen Gardner, he talks about climate change as this perfect moral storm.
Why perfect?
Because those future generations, they can't hold us accountable now for the mess we might be leaving them. It's like we make decisions, they live with the fallout.
Feels like a huge responsibility gap.
It is. So the conversation really comes down to, should our moral community just be humans? Or should it expand to include non-human life, the planet itself?
And it sounds like more and more philosophers are arguing for that expansion.
Definitely making a compelling case for it.
Okay, now let's dive into how humans have historically seen their relationship with nature. There seems to be this tension. Dominion versus stewardship. Being in charge versus taking care.
Absolutely. That dominion and exploitation view, well, it has roots in some older interpretations of religious texts.
Like Genesis 1.28. Have dominion over the earth and subdue it.
Exactly. Some interpreted that as basically a license to conquer nature, use its resources however we want. The underlying idea being humans are superior, nature's ours to use.
Masters of the universe kind of thing. Lynn White Jr. was pretty critical of that interpretation, wasn't he?
Very. He argued that specific Judeo-Christian worldview, emphasizing human dominance, was a major factor in our ecological crisis. He famously said the prevailing idea was that nature has no reason for existence except to serve man.
Oof. Puts humans totally outside and above nature.
Pretty much. And even today, with all our technology, you still see echoes of nature as just a resource, right? Forests or lumber, rivers or power sources.
Yeah, it persists.
Philosophers like Heidegger and Hans Jonas, too, they warned about this. Our tech focus risks turning nature, even us, into just standing reserve.
Standing reserve.
Just raw material, stuff waiting to be processed, optimized, used up, purely utilitarian.
That sounds bleak. But there's the counter view, thankfully. Stewardship.
Just to care. Exactly. Seeing ourselves as caretakers, not conquerors. And you find support for this in religious traditions, too. Genesis 2.15, the instruction to tend and keep the Garden of Eden.
So dominion interpreted not as domination, but as responsibility.
Right. Responsible oversight, managing resources sustainably, compassionately.
It's about having responsibility towards nature, not just power over it. And that's not just a religious idea, is it?
Not at all. Secular philosophies champion stewardship, too. Aldo Leopold's land ethic is maybe the most famous example.
Ah, yes, the land ethic.
He said we should see ourselves as plain members and citizens of the land community, not conquerors. Respect, guardianship, balance. The health of the whole ecosystem matters.
And modern science really backs this up, right? Showing how much we actually depend on a healthy environment. Clean air, water.
Absolutely. We're not separate. We're deeply dependent. Healthy ecosystems give us everything. Clean air, water, food, climate regulation. The basics for survival.
And we're seeing what happens when they're not healthy.
Yeah, the IPBES report back in 2019, that's the big international body looking at biodiversity, they were clear. Ecosystems are deteriorating fast. We're eroding the very foundations of our own well-being.
Things like COVID-19, all the climate disasters, they really hammer that home, don't they? Our prosperity is tied to environmental health.
Precisely. When ecosystems get disrupted, we feel it directly. So whether you're coming from a human-centered view or a broader life-centered one, caring for nature is, well, it's enlightened self-interest, at the very least.
Not just nice, but necessary for our own survival.
Exactly. Necessary.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. I want to explore a concept from Indian philosophy, Ahimsa. This idea of non-violence towards all living beings sounds pretty profound.
It is. Ahimsa, literally non-harm, is central in Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. And it's not just about avoiding violence to other people.
It's broader than that.
Much broader. It means causing no injury to any living being. It's seen as a supreme moral duty. At its core is this deep respect for all life.
And this isn't some New Age reinterpretation, right?
Yeah.
It goes way back.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the Tirukkural by Thiruvallvar, maybe 5th century CE. He dedicates verses to non-killing, to vegetarianism as fundamental virtues.
Really? What does he say?
He asks this powerful question, something like, how can someone be compassionate if they eat the flesh of an animal just to fatten themselves? He basically says divine grace lives in non-killing. The idea is harming others diminishes us.
It's striking. It frames not harming animals as spiritually noble,
Yeah.
recognizing their existence, their suffering.
Exactly. And in Jainism, Ahimsa is taken even further. Historically, Jains avoided not just meat, but actions that could even accidentally harm insects, microbes. It's an extraordinary level of care.
Wow. So Ahimsa starts personal, but the environmental implications are huge. If you believe in not harming living
It
things.
changes how you interact with the whole world, yeah. It naturally leads to opposing needless destruction of animals and broader environmental damage, too.
Gandhi was influenced by this, right?
Deeply. He applied Ahimsa to argue against animal exploitation, environmental harm. He saw cruelty to nature as morally wrong, linking personal ethics to these bigger environmental issues.
So in today's world, Ahimsa lines up with ethical vegetarianism, animal rights, conservation.
Precisely. It gives a philosophical foundation for many modern environmental concerns. It's fundamentally biocentric, valuing all sentient life, advocating peaceful coexistence.
It challenges us to stretch our empathy beyond just humans.
Yeah, to cultivate nonviolence towards the whole Earth community. The key insight is really that interconnectedness and the moral need to minimize suffering.
Okay, moving eastward again. Let's delve into Taoism. The Tao of nature, this idea of harmony and wu-wei, sounds very different.
It is. Taoism, from ancient China, texts like the Tao Te Ching, it offers this vision of living in harmony with the natural order, the way of the universe.
To not dominion.
No, humans are seen as part of nature, not rulers. The core idea is alignment, not control.
And wu-wei, it translates as non-action or effortless action. How does that apply environmentally? Sounds a bit passive.
It's more about non-domination, non-interference. The wise person, in Taoism, observes the natural flow, aligns with it instead of trying to force things according to human plans.
So not imposing our will on nature.
Exactly. The Tao Te Ching actually warns against trying to improve the world. It says the world is sacred. If you tamper with it, you'll ruin it. The wisdom is in letting nature take its course.
Yeah, that's powerful. The world is sacred, not an object for us to fiddle with. Suggests real humility.
Indeed, Taoism idealizes ziren, which is naturalness, spontaneity, and simplicity. Think of the metaphor of water.
Water? How so?
Water nourishes everything without striving. It seeks the lowest ground, embodying humility, adaptability. Humans should try to be like that, yielding, in tune with the natural order. Strength and flexibility, working with natural processes, not against them.
So a Taoist environmental approach would be minimalist, balanced, taking only what you need.
Exactly. Living lightly. Traditional agriculture, herbal medicine, and Taoist cultures often reflected this working with nature. And the texts often blur the lines between humans and animals, suggesting kinship.
It sounds quite eco-spiritual.
Yeah.
Nature is a teacher, a partner, not just a resource bin.
Precisely. Interfering as little as possible, allowing forests, rivers, creatures to follow their own Tao, their own inherent way. True harmony comes from respecting that inherent order.
Okay, now let's confront this historical attitude of exploitation. It feels like it really took hold, especially with the Industrial Revolution. Nature just seen as stuff to be used up.
Yeah, from the Industrial Revolution onwards, a dominant mindset, certainly in many Western societies, was that nature is primarily a stock of resources for human progress. Modern science, capitalism, they often reinforce this, prioritizing economic growth.
And thinkers like Francis Bacon talking about commanding nature. That language itself sounds pretty aggressive.
Absolutely. Bacon's talk of commanding nature, using experiments to extract its secrets. It really framed nature as something to be dominated for human knowledge and power.
And the consequences are?
All around us, aren't they? Deforestation, factory farming, pollution, treating the natural world like an instrument for economic gain, ignoring long-term impacts.
It's like nature lost any value beyond serving us. And our current environmental crisis feels like the direct result, acting like resources are infinite.
Many argue it is. Heidegger's warning about nature becoming just raw material for manipulation, it captures that danger.
Right.
A purely exploitative view is unsustainable and ethically, well, deeply problematic. The danger is reducing everything to commodities.
Which brings us to the crucial counterpoint, the intrinsic value of nature, this idea that nature has worth in itself, regardless of us, a fundamental shift.
Exactly. And this has become central to modern environmental ethics. Deep ecology, which we'll get into more, promotes the inherent worth of all life. Albert Schweitzer's reverence for life urged respect for the will to live in every creature.
So nature has a right to exist, to flourish, just for its own sake.
That's the core idea.
Leopold's land ethic fits here too, right? That idea that something is right if it preserves the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community.
Absolutely foundational. It shifts focus from just us or even individual species to the health of the whole ecosystem. Leopold asks us to value the entire land, soils, waters, plants, animals for its own sake.
And his idea of humans as plain members of that community.
Exactly, not conquerors. The well-being of the ecosystem as a whole takes precedence. That's the key insight.
So recognizing this intrinsic value, it changes our ethical guidelines toward conservation, habitat protection, even if it clashes with short-term economics.
It has to. It means we might protect a forest even if logging brings immediate cash. It underpins arguments for protecting wilderness and endangered species simply because they have a right to exist.
It's a shift from seeing nature as an object,
to seeing it as a thou, deserving respect, not domination. Seeing ourselves as part of nature, not apart from it.
Okay, so with all these different philosophical angles in mind, let's turn to the actual environmental challenges we face and the ethical responses they demand. How does the philosophy apply in the real world?
Right. Because the crises we see, resource depletion, climate change, mass extinction, environmental injustice, they aren't just scientific or economic problems, they're deeply ethical. They force us to confront responsibility, fairness.
Starting with resource depletion, we're clearly using stuff up too fast. What are the ethics there?
Yes.
Feels selfish, right? Using it all up.
The main ethical issue is intergenerational justice. Do we have the right to consume resources in a way that leaves future generations with, well, less? a depleted planet.
Sustainable development tries to address that.
It tries to balance present needs with the future's ability to meet theirs. But how well it works in practice is, heavily debated. The challenge is living within the planet's limits.
And then the huge one, pollution and climate change. The science on human impact is clear. What are the ethical dilemmas? It feels overwhelming.
Oh, they're numerous, complex. You've got global justice. The poorest nations often contributed least but suffer most.
Yeah.
There's the non-identity problem.
Yeah.
How do we owe things to future people who don't even exist yet? Plus our responsibility to other species, ecosystems disrupted by the changes. Gardner's moral storm idea comes back here.
Because the causes are spread out, responsibilities fragmented, the impacts are delayed.
Exactly. It makes it incredibly hard to tackle, ethically and politically. Finding fair, effective solutions is the challenge.
And mass species extinction. The scale is just staggering. 1 million species at risk. Ethically, what's the argument against causing such irreversible loss? It feels like we're just tearing things apart.
Many philosophers see it as a profound moral failing. Holmes Rolston III, for instance, argues species have intrinsic value as unique evolutionary products. He says a species is priceless.
Priceless.
Policies like the Endangered Species Act reflect that belief protects species, even at economic cost. The core insight is the irreplaceable nature of biodiversity. Once it's gone forever.
Then there's environmental injustice. Pollution, damage hitting marginalized communities hardest. Poor communities, minority communities, often living near the worst sites.
Yeah, that raises questions of intergenerational justice within our own time. Why should the poorest bear the brunt? There's the concept of ecological debt.
Meaning?
The idea that the wealthy global north has historically overused resources, effectively owing a debt to the global south and to future generations. And the rights of indigenous peoples, often with deep ecological knowledge, are crucial here too. Ensuring a just distribution of environmental burdens and benefits, that's the ethical challenge.
And we keep creating new ethical puzzles, don't we? Geoengineering, the link between pandemics and ecosystem disruption.
Exactly. Geoengineering intentionally altering the climate raises huge questions about our right to do that. The risks, unintended consequences. And zoonotic diseases like COVID really highlight the One Health idea. Human, animal, and environmental health are all linked.
So environmental ethics isn't just abstract theory.
Not at all. It's about the real-world challenges, the tough choices we face, choices with massive consequences. It demands we rethink how we live on this planet.
Okay, let's shift focus slightly to moral and legal status. We've talked about obligations to the environment, but what about the rights of animals, plants, maybe even rivers or ecosystems? Seems like the circle of who or what gets rights is expanding.
This is where things get really interesting, yeah. Where traditional boundaries are really being pushed. The animal rights and welfare movement, spearheaded by thinkers like Peter Singer.
Utilitarianism, right? Capacity to suffer.
Exactly. Singer argued the capacity to suffer is the key criteria for moral consideration. His critique of speciesism discriminating based on species drew parallels to racism, sexism. The core insight: if something can feel pain, that matters morally.
His line, "In suffering the animals are our equals," that really hit home for a lot of people. Hard to argue causing needless suffering is okay just because it's not a human.
It had a huge impact. And then Tom Reagan took a different tack, more deontological. He argued certain animals are subjects of a life.
Meaning they have inherent value.
Yeah.
And rights because of that.
Yes, inherent value that grants them rights, regardless of their use to us. These arguments have definitely influenced laws, bans on cosmetic testing, stronger cruelty laws.
And then the even more, radical idea, extending legal personhood to nature itself. Christopher Stone asking, should trees have standing? That sparked a real debate.
It really did. And what was once a philosophical thought experiment is now, it's legal reality in some places. Ecuador put the rights of nature Pachamama right into its constitution.
Allowing citizens to sue on behalf of ecosystems?
Exactly. The Vilcabamba River case was a landmark win based on those rights. The idea is ecosystems themselves can be harmed and deserve legal protection, a voice in court.
Incredible. A river as a plaintiff. And it's not just Ecuador.
No. Bolivia has its law of Mother Earth. New Zealand granted legal personhood to the Wanganui River, recognizing it as an ancestor with rights and interests. India, parts of the U.S., there are movements pushing for this. It's a real shift away from seeing nature purely as property.
What's the philosophical driver behind this? It feels like it goes beyond just animal welfare.
It's largely ecocentric, often influenced by indigenous worldviews, recognizing humans aren't the only entities with worth. that the Earth itself, or parts of it, deserve standing. It's controversial, sure, but it's a significant move towards giving nature a voice. The core idea: the flourishing of the planet is intrinsically valuable.
So if animals and rivers can have rights, what about plants? Whole ecosystems, where do we draw the line? Or do we?
That's the frontier, really. Biocentrism says all life has ethical standing, even if plants don't feel pain like animals. Ecocentrism goes broader still, including whole ecosystems, ecological processes.
Can non-conscious things have interests or rights, though, in the way we usually think of them?
That's the debate. But even without agreement on formal rights, the trend is definitely towards wider circles of moral consideration, recognizing duties of stewardship, respect, even for things we don't grant legal personhood to. It's moving beyond a purely human-centered view of moral worth.
It really challenges our whole traditional worldview, thinking about ethics much more broadly.
Absolutely. Seeing nature as a community of subjects, not just a collection of objects. That shift has huge implications.
Okay, let's tackle this concept of progress. For so long, it's meant tech advances, economic growth, but we're seeing the environmental cost. Is that traditional idea of progress actually counterproductive now?
That's the critical question being asked. The old equation, progress equals endless growth, equals dominating nature, it's under intense scrutiny. Because we see the correlation. That kind of progress often means environmental damage. Pollution, ecosystem collapse. Is it sustainable?
Is it really progress if it undermines the systems that support us, sacrificing long-term planetary health for short-term gain?
Precisely. Relying on fossil fuels for growth is a classic example. Some argue that beyond a point, GDP growth doesn't even improve human well-being much. But the ecological risks keep rising. The metrics for progress need to evolve beyond just economics.
Which leads to debates around sustainable development versus more radical ideas like degrowth, different paths forward.
Right. Sustainable development, think Brundtland Commission, aim to balance present needs with the future's ability to meet theirs. It spurred green tech, policies trying to decouple growth from harm.
So the hope is we can still have progress, just greener, have our cake and eat it, sort of.
That's the optimistic view. But then you have degrowth advocates saying, hold on, infinite growth on a finite planet, that's impossible.
So they argue for
Deliberately scaling down production and consumption, especially in wealthy nations, shifting focus from GDP to things like well-being, equality, ecological health. True progress might mean shrinking our economic footprint.
That's a very different vision. And controversial, I imagine. Worries about jobs, standards of living.
Definitely controversial, but it raises that crucial point. We have to evaluate our model of progress through an environmental ethics lens. Some even look back to John Stuart Mill's idea of a stationary state economy stable, not constantly growing, as potentially more sustainable.
Whether it's green growth or degrowth, seems clear we need to redefine progress. It can't just be about more stuff.
Absolutely. Otherwise, environmental destruction just becomes the shadow of our unchecked forward march. What kind of future are we actually progressing towards?
Yeah. And there's this related idea of the progress trap, our own cleverness creating new problems.
Exactly. Industrial agriculture solved hunger for many, but created huge problems with soil, water pollution, biodiversity loss. Hans Jonas argued modern tech gives us such immense power, we have a new ethical duty: caution. Responsibility for the long-term flourishing of humanity and nature. Foresight is key.
Which clashes with the techno-optimist view, right? That more innovation will just solve everything.
It does. It often comes down to attitudes towards risk. The precautionary principle says err on the side of caution if there's risk of severe harm. Critics of just charging ahead point to past tech advances with unforeseen, damaging side effects.
So it's about balancing progress with humility, not assuming every new gadget is automatically good.
Exactly. We need to ask, what's the ultimate goal? Conquering nature or living well in balance with it? That requires thinking about values beyond just material gain.
Okay, finally, let's dive into Arne Naess's distinction: shallow ecology versus deep ecology. This seems like a key way to categorize different environmental approaches.
It is. Naess coined shallow ecology, or shallow environmentalism, for the mainstream approach. It's primarily anthropocentric utilitarian. It cares about environmental issues mainly because they affect human well-being, economic growth. Self-interest is often the driver.
So things like recycling to save resources or fuel efficiency to save money and reduce smog, that's shallow.
Often, yes. It supports those things, which are good, but doesn't usually question the deeper stuff like consumerism itself or our fundamental human-centered values. Naess said it treats symptoms, not the root cause. It operates within the existing paradigm of human dominance.
It's called shallow, not necessarily to dismiss it, but because it lacks that deeper questioning of our worldview.
Exactly. Some argue for an improved shallow view, maybe suggesting a non-anthropocentric ethic is just impractical. But deep ecologists say these shallow fixes aren't enough. They might even prop up the system causing the problems, like growth-based capitalism. They argue for more fundamental change.
Which brings us to deep ecology, Naess's alternative. What's its core? Sounds more radical.
It is. Deep ecology starts from the belief that nature has intrinsic value, rights, independent of us. It calls for a radical rethink of lifestyles, population, policies.
Key ideas.
Biospheric egalitarianism, the idea that all life forms are equally members of the whole, interconnected. And a need to drastically reduce human interference in nature. The core insight is shifting from human-centeredness to recognizing the inherent worth of all life.
So it's a much more fundamental shift in perspective. Not just tweaking habits, but changing how we see ourselves relative to everything else.
It is. Naess laid out an 8-point platform emphasizing inherent worth, that current human interference is excessive, and that drastic societal changes are needed. It often supports wilderness preservation, non-coercive population reduction, simpler living, decentralization. It's about deep questioning of our current path.
So instead of just asking, how do we pollute less, deep ecology asks, why did we create a society that pollutes so much? Getting to assumptions.
Precisely. Deep questioning, reconsidering values, our place in the web of life. It has a strong eco-spiritual side, too, emphasizing interconnectedness. The takeaway is a call for profound personal and societal transformation.
Deep ecology has definitely been influential, but it's faced criticism, too, hasn't it? Seen as extreme, maybe.
Yes. Murray Bookchin, for one, was a major critic. He worried it could be misanthropic, blaming humanity in general and neglecting the social causes of environmental problems like hierarchy, capitalism.
So, focusing too much on nature, potentially ignoring social justice.
That was a key critique. Naess responded, but the debate highlighted that tension. The criticism often centers on whether it sufficiently addresses issues of power and inequality within human societies.
But even with critiques, it pushed the conversation deeper, made us think beyond just human interests.
Absolutely. And out of these debates came other important schools like social ecology and eco-socialism, trying to integrate ecological and social concerns, bridging that gap.
Okay, let's delve into Murray Bookchin's social ecology then. What's the central idea? Sounds like it brings society right back into focus.
It does. Social ecology argues our ecological problems are fundamentally rooted in social problems, specifically hierarchy, domination, injustice among humans. Bookchin famously said, the idea that man must dominate nature stems from the domination of man by man.
So you can't fix the environment without fixing social inequality. They're linked.
That's the core idea. Social and ecological issues are intertwined. You need social liberation for ecological sustainability. Social ecology advocates dismantling hierarchies, creating decentralized democratic communities, eco-anarchism, or eco-communalism.
So it critiques approaches that focus only on wilderness or changing consciousness.
Right. Bookchin felt they ignored corporate power, authoritarian politics. The key insight: social liberation is a prerequisite for ecological health.
What are some key ideas within social ecology? What does it look like?
It talks about dialectical naturalism, seeing society and nature evolving together. It values human creativity, but guided by ecological principles. Importantly, it rejects misanthropy. It argues destructive social systems cause destructive behavior, not inherent human evil. It looks to examples like indigenous horticultural societies.
And it's more action-oriented, changing society, not just mindsets.
Yes, it's an activist philosophy. Influenced eco-villages, green municipalist movements, building alternative social structures that are both ecologically sound and socially just.
How does it compare to deep ecology then? Different priorities.
You could say deep ecology focuses more on changing consciousness and valuing all life intrinsically, while social ecology prioritizes changing social structures, economic, political as the key. Bookchin criticized deep ecology for, he felt, overlooking capitalism's role. But again, there's a growing trend trying to integrate these, recognizing both inner and outer change are needed.
Okay, last area, ecofeminism. Connecting women, ecology, and the ethics of care. Brings a gender lens to this whole discussion.
Exactly. Ecofeminism emerged from realizing the domination of women and the domination of nature are linked, especially within patriarchal societies. It looks at how historically associating women with nature and men with culture has justified subordinating both.
That connection woman-nature as things to be controlled, that's key. both viewed as resources.
Absolutely. Ecofeminists like Carolyn Merchant track how the view of Earth shifted from nurturing mother to a machine ripe for exploitation, coinciding with increased control over both women and nature. They highlight parallels in how both are often treated: passive, existing to serve male needs. The critique is of dualistic thinking that devalues both.
So environmental problems need a gender analysis too. What are the core tenets? What do ecofeminists bring to the table?
Key ideas include a critique of patriarchal values like domination, competition, control, an emphasis on traditionally feminine principles like care, connection, nurturing as a basis for environmental ethics, and often a reevaluation of spiritual perspectives, goddess traditions, indigenous beliefs that honor the earth, values centered on relationality.
And it sees women's liberation and nature's liberation is tied together. Can't have one without the other.
Precisely. The phrase, "what is done to the earth is done to women," captures how environmental harm often disproportionately impacts women. Ecofeminist visions involve shifting towards partnership, collaboration, rejecting what Karen Warren called the logic of domination. It's about a more holistic, relational worldview.
And this isn't just theory. It connects to real-world activism.
Absolutely. Think of the Chipko movement in India, women literally hugging trees to protect them. Environmental health activism often led by women fighting toxic pollution like Lois Gibbs or Erin Brockovich. Movements for organic farming, seed saving, often led by women seeing their work as nurturing the earth.
So ecofeminism adds this crucial intersectional lens, saying ecological harmony requires dismantling patriarchy, valuing women's insights, valuing marginalized perspectives generally.
Exactly. It broadens environmental ethics to include human relationships, the need for a more egalitarian, life-affirming society. It challenges power structures at all levels.
So bringing this deep dive to a close. Wow, it's clear our relationship with nature demands some serious ethical rethinking. So many perspectives, no easy answers.
Absolutely not. But we've seen these common threads emerge, haven't we? Responsibility, interconnectedness, the need to broaden our moral concern beyond just us. That gives us a strong foundation.
And we've covered this whole spectrum, from caring stewardship to radical equality for all beings to needing fundamental societal transformation. Many ways to think about our place here.
So considering all these different philosophical lenses, here's a thought. What single shift in our thinking do you believe would have the most significant positive impact on our relationship with the environment?
Ooh, that's a tough one. A really powerful question to leave us with. Makes you really think about core values and how they drive action.
Indeed. Let's end maybe just by remembering we are part of Earth's community, not somehow separate. Our role should be one of mindful participation. And exploring these ideas further feels pretty crucial right now.